Welcome everyone. Today we've got Julide Turker with us, who studied at the Australian College of Natural Medicine, where she completed a joint degree in nutrition and herbal medicine, graduating as a functional medicine practitioner. Then Julide further pursued her studies at the University of Melbourne with a master's in food sciences engineering. Julide, the first question I would like, firstly, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
My first question to you is about Sunnah medicine. It seems to be a word or term that's becoming very popular, but we also know it's full of gems.
Yeah.
I do notice that you mentioned it is predominantly preventative. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Second to that, it's a very valid question because even in this day and age, I kind of feel like when you say prophetic medicine or Sunnah medicine, automatically the first thing that comes into your mind is an olive tree or pomegranates or
Dates.
breaking your fast with dates, And I think it is so much more than that as a philosophy and a lifestyle, but they're the really profound kind of things that we've been taught along the way. So when we say preventative medicine, when you look at the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, much of what he's done from a health perspective and much of what he's eaten from a health perspective tends to be in alignment with a healthy man living as consciously as possible, keeping his body as healthy as possible. So a lot of people kind of, they get the cancer and then they go onto the black seed oil and then they wonder why their cancer hasn't cured, right? So when I went into the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and when I explored some of the hadith that are authentic according to the Sunni school of thought, I realized that the vast majority, probably 2/3 of the hadith that are specific to health and wellness, were literally about how not to get sick, as opposed to what do you do when you are sick. It's about how do you eat, how much do you eat, when do you eat, how do you eat, and movement and whatnot, but nothing so much specific to now. You'll see a naturopath or a medical doctor and you'll have, I've got a bacterial infection and the answer is an antibiotic, or I've got a gastritis and the answer might be A, B, or C. But in conventional medicine at the moment, there is no preventative paradigm. It's kind of like whatever you've come with, whatever disease label or symptom, it's a symptom management strategy. And then in naturopathy, which I find aligns very beautifully with prophetic medicine, is not just about healing as holistically as possible, utilizing as much natural therapies as possible. It's also about how do we prevent this health challenge from recurring so that you don't have to keep visiting the naturopath, you don't have to keep visiting the functional medicine practitioner, or you don't have to offset a side effect caused by a supplement by taking another supplement. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, definitely it does. And I noticed that in the hospital system when my brother was in hospital, it was very much, okay, what has he got now? What do we treat? And often when you treat something else comes up. Then it's like, okay, we've got to treat that. And obviously, it's very much about putting out fires, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's so valid. And I understand the predicament there, though, because in the last 70 years, the conventional model has become very symptomatic. So I often tell my clients and patients, you're asking the right questions, but you're asking them to the wrong people. When your brother is in hospital and he's, undergoing a particular health challenge, they don't really care how to prevent it. All they care about is keeping him alive, right?
Exactly.
So whilst, no one cares about the ground root cause, and natural medicine or Islamic medicine too is all about how do I prevent? And then if it occurs, there are solutions in it from an Islamic perspective. And doctors like Ibn Sina, they would prescribe literally one thing. And if that didn't work, they would go to a more complex herbal remedy and 2 or 3 things, 2 or 3 herbs. And if that didn't work, they would go to a more multifaceted approach, because the idea is really to kind of treat the underlying cause and keep it simple. And I think where there's no awareness, Zuleyha, I think the biggest challenge is this. Like when I get a client come in and the client says, my child has eczema, what have you done? I've utilized corticosteroids topically. They assist temporarily and then the eczema comes back. And the predicament is this: the mother and the father or the caretakers have no background information on, okay, did you know that your child has diarrhea, or let's say undiagnosed food intolerances that are contributing to the skin condition. And when you don't have the information, you kind of go, all right, Julide, you're saying let's treat the cause. How do I know what the cause of my child's eczema is?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, right, so for them, there is no awareness. So this part of the equation doesn't exist when the awareness is not there. The only thing that exists is my child has eczema. I don't know why they have it. Allah gave this to test me if they're Muslim or they have a belief system. And the doctor prescribed an immunosuppressant. And even yesterday, I was speaking to a client of mine, and she was speaking to me about how she thought her child had eczema, and she used a corticosteroid. And within a couple of days, she said to me, within a couple of days, my child's rash was gone. And then within a couple of weeks, the rash came back, of course. And so people assume that sort of an approach is already kind of like treating the root cause, when it's not. It's just temporarily suppressing the immune system to shut off the physical symptom that's coming up. And then when you remove that plug, the symptom all comes back, and sometimes with a vengeance.
That's true. Very true. So that's a good segue, I think, my next question, which is about your book. And I will put a link to your book in the comment section, where you say 1/3 of your stomach. It's titled 1/3 of your stomach. And in this, you talk about the connection between the mind, body, and spirit. And, to me, this is quite fascinating and interesting because, as an Islamic spirituality lecturer, my whole focus has been the connection between the body and spirituality. But I've never really thought about it from this perspective, the perspective about consuming food. I've been conscious of it, don't get me wrong, but it seems hard enough to tell people that they're a spirit with a body, not a body with a spirit. To me, they're two very different things, because if the spirit is at the core, then everything else falls into place accordingly. What is the main take-home message that you have within this book? And what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. I think that the first part of the answer is the take-home message is the absolute awareness that Islam in and of itself contains all the answers, right? And I agree with you. And for me, I suppose it oscillates in that sometimes and I suppose from a spiritual perspective, yes, there is a physical reality. There's a biochemical reality of existence, right? So if you're eating the wrong kind of foods, and there's a saying by Omar radiallahu anha, and it's in the Muwatta, and it says, in Imam Malik's Muwatta actually, and it says, beware of meat, for in meat there is an addiction like there is in wine. Now, if the only important thing in this life was to pursue spiritual wellness, then Islam would have not factored in anything to do with food, like physically consuming food, right? But we know we eat with our right hand, we don't eat and drink at the same time, we use our fingers to make sure that we're only getting a morsel worth of food, so there's a consciousness for the physical quantity of the food. So in the book, I explore the very moderate concept of, whilst it is important that we pursue spiritual liberation, can that liberation be achieved without physical liberation? Or can the physical be liberated without the spiritual? And neither can be done without the other. I feel like that they coexist. And only like only in times where we see people of significant spiritual value, where, there's stories about, and I wrote about this in my book, in the time of the Ottoman Empire, there was Somunjudede, and, people would see him exit from the mosque out of 3 doors at the same time. And that sounds like a miracle, or it sounds like a fable, or it sounds like you're hallucinating. But the reality is, people of God, of that level of spiritual might, are so much more spiritual than they are material, that their spiritual body is able to oscillate that way. And I think in this day and age, as Muslims, we have become so much more mammalian in our approach. Like, we're mammals, we feed our ego as a result of excessively feeding our body. And this is why there are Sahih Hadith in Bukhari that says, Rasulullah never had a stomach until even on the day that he passed away. Or it says he never ate his full, which is my book was inspired by the hadith, 1/3 of your stomach for food, 1/3 for water, and 1/3 for air. And the 1/3 for air is such a further beautiful exploration when you look at the way it's been translated. And then, you know, some scholars say it's because you need a little bit of space and downtime for the food to digest. And other scholars say Rasulullah did that so that if someone did unexpectedly come in, he was able to eat a little bit out of courtesy and kindness and compassion and empathy with the visitor. Like, how beautiful is that? And in Ibn al-Qayyim's book, which he has written numerous volumes on prophetic medicine, and his work kind of collaborates our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's work in a few volumes specific and relative to health and disease and wellness. And he says, subhanAllah, that there, and this was in the 11th century, if I'm not mistaken, and he says that there is no disease that occurs other than which occurs because we have ingested the new amount of food prior to the existing food being digested. So excessive food consumption, in his words, is the 100% contributing factor, not 90, not 80, not the vast majority. He says all diseases come because we consume food prior to the meal that we've consumed before has been properly digested and assimilated by the body. And I can go off on a biochemical tangent to explain, you know, the process of digestion and therefore understanding what he means very well, because cancer is as a result of poor detoxification processes. You know, cancer occurs because we have an accumulation of toxins in our body. So we can even link cancer to excessive food consumption. And quite frankly, if I was to jump on a Google search engine and look up some scientific literature, I do not doubt that I would get papers and papers of peer-reviewed, double-blinded placebo trials that possibly make that connection between overconsumption and cancer, overconsumption, thyroid disease, overconsumption, you know, ulcerative colitis, bowel problems, thyroid dysfunction, you name it.
What you're telling me is fascinating. And as you said, there is a lot of evidence to support what you're saying. But it seems for someone who is new into this space, it could be quite overwhelming because they think, well, there's the nafs aspect to it. When you talk about food, our relationship with food is really important. And even when you look at the Islamic akhlaq etiquettes literature, their main thing is you eat to survive, to thrive.
Yeah.
Whereas in today's world, food is very much about, you know, what do I feel like? It's a nefsi thing. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
what am I
Yeah.
yearning for? You open up the pantry
Yeah.
or the fridge, and it's like, what do I feel like? It's such a different approach to food that we should have Islamically. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I partly agree with what you're saying and I partly disagree with it. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
If I agree with what you're saying, when the Islamic paradigm has been taught to us the way it was taught in the 90s, where Islam is just a physical facade and doesn't really go into spirituality and the physiology of the human body or from a health perspective. And the vast majority of us growing up in the 90s and onwards, or actually the vast majority of us full stop, have grown up to assume that Islam has no connection with food. Had we been taught Islam holistically, and not just Islam means wear a hijab, Islam means, you know, the 5 pillars of Islam. Had we been taught Islam properly, it would have been so much easier for us. And the reason why it's occurring the way that you're saying, and yes, it's completely challenging, even for me as a person who reads and understands and knows, is because we've been taught a particular way and then the culture has submitted itself into the religion. And so there's this mesh of cultural standards about, you know, it's aib if you don't, you know, if Zuleyha Habla tells me to eat a tatler. And you know, there's even Sahih Hadith again in Bukhari where a lizard was served to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he politely declined the lizard. So if Rasulullah, if we're getting examples of his life from scholars who have purposely put together particular hadiths so that they are, you know, you can quickly go to a hadith and go, all right, this gives me the answer. And so I'm allowed to politely say, thank you, Zuleyha Habla. I don't feel like, you know, I'm not going to have that tatler, I'm not going to have that baklava, the sweet, whatever, right? But number one, we have a history of immense amount of trauma. And as a result, we, unfortunately, because we've also been raised from a cultural paradigm and not an Islamic paradigm, we don't have boundaries. And therefore, we don't acknowledge the difference between being respectful and giving yourself space in a relationship, as opposed to taking away the right your body has over you to kind of go, oh, so Zuleyha Habla doesn't get upset. I ate that baklava, but now I've got the runs, or I've got a stomach ache, or, now it's done something to me, whatever it might be, the effects of refined sugar on you, right? But Islam gives you your body a right over you. So why am I not holding that boundary? Again, because my culture has deviated from Islam, and therefore I've got this lack of common sense trying to get religion and culture, and I don't even know, is this about my religion or my culture? I'm not sure. So to answer your question very shortly, or to summarize a response to that question, the summary would be this. The vast majority of us struggle with eating well because we have not been given the ground root opportunities of understanding that the Islamic paradigm is food. And so now we have to go back and correct it because it's missing. And so we have all these particular addictions to food and these cultural philosophies. And so how do we go back and unwind and unlearn all of that?
Yeah,
Right.
that's the word that was sticking in my head. There's a lot of unlearning that has to take place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the predicament is real because, then people go, oh, Rasulullah loved milk. And I'm like, have you even read the seerah? Like, it was recommended milk is drank when people are sick because they're desert Arabs. With due respect, there's no excessive nutrition. It's just whatever comes in with the, twice a year when the camels come on horsebacks and there's some trade happening twice a year. So even, the way that the hadith is translated is not in context. Like, Rasulullah could be said to be a semi-vegetarian. Again, Sahih hadith that said there's no, no smoke coming out of his chimney for 40 days. And when the Sahaba asked why, and he would say, I'm having barley and dates, things that are raw, that don't require cooking. And then people's arguments tend to be, oh, but he was poor. No, he wasn't. He was like the president of He was like the president of Medina when he made the migration, right?
So
So
I think if he chose to consume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if he was sent as a light to man, as an ability to kind of look at what he does and do the best to the best of our ability, I acknowledge that there is very rarely any way we could get any close to how he practiced Islam. But if that's the torch and the light, then our job is to get as close as possible to that. So I suppose to answer your question, like even our Islamic schools, there is no food therapy in the school. There's no nutrition in the school. The canteens are full of rubbish. We're dealing with Muslim mothers that criticize you because you didn't want your child to have a lollipop. We're dealing with Muslim grandmothers who, probably roll their eyes back at you because you wanted to restrict your child's consumption of a particular chocolate or a slice of cake, going, you had what happened to you. I don't have time to explain what happened to me in this short podcast, but believe me, a lot happened to me as a result of consuming
I
the
can
wrong thing.
imagine.
Right.
I can imagine. I guess as you're talking, I'm thinking like there is so many battles for Muslims and Muslim women to fight, if I put it that way, as in Islamophobia, women issues, gender issues. I guess, but you're very passionate about this, and I completely understand why. But where do you get the strength to focus on this particular, I guess, aspect of Islamic lifestyle?
I don't know, to be honest. I'm going to say Allah inspired me. I remember at age 14, we went to Hajj, and all I ever wanted to be in my life was a GP. And then I wanted to do like brain surgery. And I remember my mum telling me I was 14. This is over 20 years ago. And mum said to me, when you see the Kaaba, whatever dua you make, Allah will accept it. And I never forget this. And my eyes were closed. And then when I stood in, I knew I was in front of the Kaaba. I'm like, where is it? Mum's like, don't look, it's there. Okay, close my eyes. I'm like, I want to be a doctor. Open my eyes. I thought, that's it. I'm going to do this. And then I kind of found myself, right? And I suppose, what is a doctor? It's somebody who helps people with their health challenges, right? Not in the PhD aspect of the word, and not in the, I suppose I was thinking it was definitely in the medical, a bachelor in medical, right, aspect, but no. And I suppose every time I had an opportunity, Allah just I think it was just divine intervention, and that's the only way I can answer it. And I find the passion because I also make a lot of mistakes myself, and I also show myself a level of compassion because Allah is Al-Rahman, and Allah's 99 beautiful names have been instilled in each and every one of us, and I think some of them come out a lot more than others. And I kind of feel like the more I'm able to hold space for myself, and kind of go, I had that, I made a mistake, may Allah forgive me, inshallah my next meal is going to be better. Because whenever I do these, workshops, podcasts, whatever, the first person I point the finger at is myself, in kind of
That's
going,
really powerful, actually. I'm glad you do, because a lot of people they don't have that self-compassion where they constantly feel guilty, and that's not a good place to be, is it?
how is change possible with guilt change? It's not possible. But and this is why, subhanAllah, we were speaking off the podcast with you about having children, and I had mentioned, I've got 3, and I kind of feel like in each child that I've had, there's been numerous emotional challenges and physical challenges in my life, but it's always given me the opportunity to kind of go, this is a calling from Allah to tell me that what I'm doing is perhaps not the best thing to do. And I suppose it's not only when you disconnect from the ego, but it's also when you begin to physically purify yourself. So when you go, how do you stay inspired? When you keep eating well and you feel good and you're grounded and you've got
Yes.
mental clarity and focus, it becomes easier and easier to resonate with your message, right? If I was really passionate about health and wellness, but I was still doing all those refined carbohydrates and excessively consuming meat or dairy, or not being conscious of the food, number one, I would carry so much shame and guilt that it would probably cripple me and paralyze me from doing anything, and probably not even be able to find a level of compassion for myself. But I kind of feel like, again, it's that, like Rumi says, life is about holding on and letting go. It's kind of like finding the compassion and then doing what you can, not doing everything. Like I always tell my clients, you don't have to eat organic tomorrow, but invest in yourself to go to Bunnings, get yourself a couple of seedlings of parsley and mint. It's not the end of the world. And at least your parsley and mint in your salad can be organic, that you've grown, you've prayed on it. It's with beautiful purified water. I mean, the Jews, the very right-wing devout Jews, they don't even think it's, we're allowed to eat, drink from foam cups. And I think the Islamic way is the same too, because a foam cup is so inbeneficial for health in terms of the chemicals and what they do to the thyroid in the body. And I think as Muslims, like one thing I found, and I promise in my heart of hearts, I don't say this as a form of criticism, but as a form of bringing light onto a matter that's been dealt with very incorrectly. Like a lot of people are protesting and boycotting brands for what's happening in Gaza at the moment. And so many companies have taken the step towards creating a halal cola. Now, if you to ask me, there is no such thing as a halal cola, right? So it's fabulous. I swear, it's fantastic that people are like, we're not going to pay money to this brand and we're going to create our own. But again, those people don't have awareness around, we're talking about a soda laced in artificial chemicals and colors, possibly preservatives, in a leaching plastic container, with lots of sugar in there. How is the concept of halal and tayyib applicable to this product that I can't even call a food? And so what we need to do is kind of go, we don't care about boycotting Coke and Pepsi. As Muslims, we shouldn't even be drinking those things in the first place.
First place, just stop drinking, you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And if we didn't, then
yeah.
it wouldn't be so hard to kind of go, we were at the store the other day and my daughter's like, so which chocolate can we buy, Mum? Can't do the Cadbury's, can't do the Nestle's. And that's fine, because then it's your life becomes void of all these artificial colours and preservatives and chemicals. And again, when you look into the literature, it's not just me theoretically making assumptions that food is unhealthy or this chocolate is unhealthy. It's literally the science is there. Processed meat, according to the World Health Organization, is classified as a carcinogen, and we still have processed meat in our diets, and we eat it with a basmati. The contradiction is
the
real.
paradox. Yeah.
Right. And I pray from the bottom of my heart, and I say this whilst I have lots of divergence and lots of problems and lots of issues with my own diet. I'm kind of like, the only way forward is literally to break apart the matrix, like unlearn everything and relearn in alignment with Islam. And if we did that, the level of mental health challenges, the level of cancers, the level of anxiety in our children, neurological delays, autism. Now it's become fabulous to label yourself as an ADHD, like it's called neurodivergent. The neurology of the human in context of common sense does not divert unless there is a source that is causing the diversion, and it's not a healthy diversion. It's not something to be proud of to say I've got ADHD. I hold compassion for people who can say this, like me. I make lots of mistakes. I'll never come onto any podcast or say I'm the best, I do all this and you guys don't. But at the same time, to kind of go, as much as I accept that as an injury in neurology, I don't accept it as a divergent state, like it's just diversity of the brain. No, it's not, because so many things that have to be done as a human being cannot be done when you have ADHD. It's challenging. It's not easy to be that. And then as much as I want people to accept it, I don't want them to accept it as this is me, this is my personality. No, my neurology of my brain has been wired this way because of my trauma, a history of trauma, like mental illness, or like emotional, psychological trauma, and as a result of the excessive amount of chemicals that my brain has been exposed to. And so the goal in my life should be, how do I clean the weeds out of my own backyard? And I think the vast majority of us concentrate on the backyard of others a lot, or we feel safe when we get a label because it justifies our shortcomings, whether that be neurological or the label, well, I've got diabetes, so I can't fast anyway. It feels good because now I don't have to worry about not fasting anymore. And I know that's going to trigger a lot of people, but at some stage in life, someone has to come out there and say things as it is, as gently and as truly as possible, so that Allah inspires our hearts to make the changes that we need to create a more conscious and sustainable earth.
Okay, there's a lot there to digest. I want to ask you a few quick questions. I hadn't thought of this, but it's come to my mind. Just quick questions, quick answers. If there was one thing you would tell people definitely to stay away from, what would it be?
Honestly, I'm going to say nothing, because I don't think my job is to tell people what to do. I think I want to be a beacon of inspiration and just an opportunity to shed awareness, and I want people to make that decision for themselves.
For themselves. Okay, so I guess my question was like something that's very harmful, but it's so overused, but you want people to make that decision themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So if that was the case, then I would say that the excessive consumption of meat. Not only is it harmful on our bodies, it's also very harmful on the planet. And, we know Islamically, even though there is no heaven or hell for animals, we know that whatever torture we have done to an animal, the animal gets their haq, their right over us, before the animal disappears. And so imagine the animal holocaust happening at the moment, the epidemic and then we eat those headless chickens and we wonder why we have anxiety, because we've just smashed the cortisol and the nervous system of the chicken is just passed on to us.
Yes. So, no, it's a very good points. And I won't go into it, but this notion of halal, what makes meat halal, I think it's much more complicated than what we sometimes put out there. Just by saying besmillah and, slaughtering in a particular way, it's beyond that. Next question, if there's one thing you think people should consume more of, what do you think it should be? Like for general health.
Literally, like what you're going to consume more of is consume more thought and less food. Like, think before you eat. I don't think the problem is what are we not having that we should have. I think the problem is what are we having that we shouldn't. So it'll be so much better to reverse illness by having less than to put something else in to make things better.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, my next question, if you were to give one advice about Sunnah medicine, specifically, what would it be? It's a big area, as you said, and it's more preventative, but there's so much interest in this space. What would be your one advice, particularly about Sunnah medicine?
Probably to learn what it actually is. Yeah.
As opposed to just honey and dates and black seed.
Yeah, right. With due respect, because that's great. And there's a lot I can speak about the biochemistry of how black seed has an immune modulating effect. And this is why it's a cure to all. But that being said, there are so many other herbs, seeds and whatnot that have immune modulating effects too. So, the short answer to that would literally be learn genuinely what prophetic medicine is. And then at your discretion, begin where you think it's the easiest step to take.
Yeah.
That might be cutting out something that might be bringing in something, whatever you feel is the thing that you can begin and kind of feel a little bit empowered to be doing something right.
Yeah, and I think your point, like, I didn't, and I didn't mean to undervalue those three things I mentioned, and I know you appreciated that. But just thinking about it, say honey, we might put honey in our tea when we've got a sore throat. Again, it's when that something's there that we do it. Whereas, why haven't we been putting honey in our tea all these years, where you
Absolutely.
may have actually prevented the sore throat in the first
Absolutely.
place?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. And the fine line is this, I guess today, Habla, there's a line between kind of going, I have cancer and I acknowledged all the steps that I've taken that has led me to developing this disease, which is the
Mhm.
vast majority of cancers today, subhanAllah, versus I have cancer, but I supplemented, I ate well, I did
Mhm.
my exercise, I prayed my prayers in complete khushu and spirituality, and now, amen, now this is my test.
Yes,
And this is
I
why
love that.
Allah gives us a level. This is why the first verse, I suppose, was Iqra. There has to be a level of consciousness with the steps that we take, and then the consequences for those steps. And I know cancer is probably a very massive topic and probably not one I should give example for, because there's a lot of contributing factors to cancer that are outside of our control, in the quality of water, the quality of air, the exposure
Mhm.
of carcinogens and toxins through means that we don't necessarily have control over. But
Mhm.
the vast majority of the time, we are unwell because of an accumulation of toxins, and they don't just come to us magically. They come to us because we eat them, we rub it on ourselves, we wear the polyester clothing, and as a result, that this is where we're at.
Yeah, no, I love that balance as well between, it's really a tawakkul. It reminds me of, you got to tie your camel and then trust your affairs to Allah. As you said, we tie the camel as best as we can with the rope that's available to us, with the skills that we have developed. But we know that, as you said, what if something happens, then we trust, it's from Allah. We accept the qadar, but we do have choices in life, and we do have the responsibility of educating ourselves to make the best choices possible.
100%. You are never void of the responsibility post puberty. I mean, when we're never void of the responsibility of learning, as opposed to, when you read the Quran, it surprises me how often, including myself as a practitioner, people follow me blindly without a question, because they're like, if Julide says it, it's probably right. And that's a sad predicament, because I too am human. And just because a practitioner, a medical doctor, a neurosurgeon, a Harvard graduate says something, it doesn't make you void of the ability to intellectually, peel the layers of the onion and kind of go, actually, what Julida said makes sense, but it's actually not applicable. Or, and I think that when you read the Quran, and Allah in third person or in first person is constantly saying, this is for the person of thought. Do you not think? Are people not using their minds? Are people not using their logic? Do you not? And there's so many rhetorical questions and so many analogies that constantly remind us of using this thing that's given to us, because I can't say when I pass away, well, Dr. Zuleha told me that this is the way that I had to pray, and I just listened to her. You're not going to be responsible for that, Zuleha. I still am, as a sane Muslim that has reached puberty. I am held 100% accountable where the information comes, and if that source of information is relevant, relative, and in alignment with Islamic philosophy.
Absolutely. Okay, my final question, which I feel you may have touched on, but for someone who's just listened to this podcast, there's a lot to take in. What would be your advice, like, as in, what's one thing that they can do to improve who they are as a person, as a complete person?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to answer that semi-selfishly, and I'm going to say buy and read my book, because there's about 170 references in there. There are multiple
Wow.
references to other books that you can begin to build your understanding on. But I've read it in lay terms, in a way where everyone can kind of open up a chapter and begin to reflect on themselves. And it's
Mm,
easier than confronting someone about your own shortcomings, because there's a whole chapter on trauma and how we're, tied to food for that dopamine hit. And it'll really give you kind of a great foundation of really understanding where to begin, and then from there you can begin to build, because the reality is, where do you start from? If you just start
mm,
from a comment or a fact, like, you don't get really far. But if you've got a book or a website and kind of multiple things to explore, then things begin to start to make sense. When you've got the foundations, like you were saying before, you're like, oh, this came to my mind now. Like, you can make a logical inference or a logical connection between what I've told you or what you've read off my book versus what you have done in the past. Oh yeah, that's what had happened. Like, knowledge. And it doesn't just come to you by watching Turkish soapies. It actually never comes to you watching, Turkish soapies. And I say that with due respect, because so many people waste so much time in front of TV. And then they'll be like, oh, how do you do what you do? I don't watch TV. Right? I don't scroll the internet. You know how the phone will always give you how many minutes you're on the phone?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many ways of being aware of how we're wasting our time. And if you could just kind of gear up and kind of go 2 hours of TV a night, I do. Instead of that, I'm going to read a book or listen to a podcast or, begin to collaborate some notes on some topics, and then Allah will inspire your heart. I swear, like, you just find a way, you find the answers, they come to you. It's just a matter of you taking that step, and then everything is literally in front of you. Like, it's just divine.
That's so true. Yeah. Imagine you spent 1 to 2 hours a day on a particular topic for one whole year. That's nearly
PhD.
It's nearly a PhD. It really is. Like, a person could become, if it's done in a systematic way,
absolutely,
you can almost become a scholar in that area. Like, we can all become so educated.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was a book actually I read many years ago. I forgot what it was, but it was something on the lines of, being the number one at something by doing it 4 hours a week even. I forgot the title of the book. It's completely skipping. It was a very thick book. It was like the 4 hour work week. That's what it's called.
Oh, okay.
And it was like, if you invest 4 hours structured the way that you said to, because the other thing is we're in a time and age, that there's so much information. And so people will be like, I'm not going to use coconut oil because that influencer told me it's bad. And then they replace it with the seed oil. And then they're like, oh, the other influencer told me the seed oil is bad. Now I'm not. But that's not where your information should be. You know what I mean? Like, when people come to me and say, I don't do that, I took it out. Why? Because I saw it on Instagram. It's not really a justifiable source. It's not like a primary source of information, right? And I find we're just wasting a lot of time in this gibberish amount of information that is out there. We need to go back to books. We need to go back to journal articles, the literature. Even there are areas of problems there, but if we go back, it's going to really feel the potholes a little bit better than kind of going, seed oils are bad, coconut's too saturated in fat, soy is bad for you, and then you're like, well, if all the beans and legumes are taken out, then what are you having if you're vegetarian and you need a protein source, right?
Yeah.
No, and I think cancel culture, big disease. Like, I don't like
disease. Okay, cancer, big problem.
Big because disease. And and I always say, every single person's Diablo I follow, at least 10 to 20+% I disagree with them. But the 70% that I agree with them is enough for me to stay on their page, because there's going to be something of value that comes to me. It's also allowing me to critically evaluate the information that I have. So instead of being offended by what you have to say, I kind of sit with that and go, oh, I never thought of it that way before. Or initially kind of going, that triggered me. Let me come back to this when I'm mentally a little bit more grounded to kind of understand why I was triggered, why I was offended, why I reacted that way. But instead, unfollow. We do that on Instagram too. If you don't agree with this post, then just press unfollow.
I intentionally keep connected to people that I disagree with because it helps me to understand their perspective. Otherwise, I'm in an echo chamber, and how healthy is that going to be?
Not very, and I completely agree with you. Not very healthy at all. Absolutely. Not at all. And you're not giving yourself an opportunity for the information that has come to you or that you hold so close to your heart. Like, I have certain belief systems about the medical industry, and I'll challenge every single surgeon friend I have, pharmacist friend I have, anyone who is in the medical field, and I'll say, this is my belief system, break it. This is what I think. And we might go into a discussion and I'm like, yep, but you still have not convinced me to think otherwise, even though you've stated A, B, and C. Now, if they don't state A, B, and C, then I'm blindly following. I may as well be in my own cult. Like you said, the echoing of your own information, then I'm just in my own cult of a delirium. You know what I mean? Like, subhanAllah. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Julide, for your time. This has been extremely beneficial. And if there's, please everyone get Julide's book, read it, and just start your journey. That's all I can say. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you at a future podcast, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.